name is Shimon Arbel. I was born in Hamilton, Ontario, Stephen Albert, Bond Street. I moved to Israel in 1973, before the Yom Kippur War. And I had the good fortune in 1979 of falling in love and marrying one of my best friends, Josie from Toronto. And what's interesting, we've been living in Israel all these years. I am fourth generation Canadian, and Josie's third generation Canadian, which is unusual among Canadians, at least those who came to Israel, most of whom are first generation, whose parents immigrated to Canada. So it's a little unusual to find Canadians or Americans actually in Israel who are third or fourth generation.
And we have children who are first generation Israelis.
That's right.
So tell me, before I get into your family or what you do, etc., why did you make Aliyah? How did that come about?
I grew up in a very strong Zionist family.
Your parents were?
Jewish Zionist family.
Who were your parents?
My Benjamin and Evelyn Albert. My father's no longer alive. My mother lives in Dundas. But I grew up in a very strong Zionist family. As a matter of fact, when I was a kid, our grandmother lived with us. My grandmother lived with us. And she used to tell us stories about in Hamilton when she met Ben Gurion and Jabotinsky and others who came to Toronto, or one came to Hamilton, I think it was Weitzman, actually came to Hamilton and spoke somewhere downtown in the 1940s. And she had pictures, and I was at the age of 4, 5, 6, 7, and for me these were like children's stories that she would tell me, and they were exciting. In any case, so I grew up with a strong love for Israel, and I visited here when I was 16 with USY.
Ramah.
And with Ramah, conservative movement with Ramah. And I came home and I said, I'm moving to Israel. And at the time, in order to study at the Hebrew University, because I came as a student, full-time, full-degree student at Hebrew University, not the one-year program, but the requirement at the time was you had to have had 1 year of university in Canada. So after I finished grade 13 in Hamilton at HCI, that I went for 1 year to the University of Toronto. The only reason I went to U of T is because I wanted to come to Hebrew University. I finished my 1 year, and then in June of 1973, I moved to Israel, and I've lived in Jerusalem for, it will soon be 40 years. 40 good years.
I was in Israel, the overseas program, in 72. I came right after grade 13, but I did the overseas program, went back.
I was there 74, 75.
And I remember my father telling me a story about Chaim Weitzman being, but my father wasn't a detail person, and he thought it was Chaim, he wasn't sure,
I
but...
think he was right.
Well, now I see he was right. You're the first person to confirm it.
Because I remember, my grandmother told the stories about how she'd see these Zionist leaders at the Royal York in Toronto. But there was one who came to Hamilton, and probably, I should say probably, perhaps it could be, there is some kind of historic
Do you still have
record.
Photographs of these famous Israeli Zionists in Toronto?
I had a book, I'll tell you what I did with it. I donated it to the National Library here in Israel.
Okay.
That's Adina, our youngest.
Hi.
This is Wendy.
Okay.
From Hamilton.
So one of the reasons, what I'm saying to everybody, some of the same things, because themes emerge. There's an urban legend that Hamilton, Ontario has the highest per capita aliyah rate of anywhere in the world. I'm sure that no one's actually done research on this. It's anecdotal, just anecdotal. So I don't know if it's true or not, but there are a lot of Hamiltonians in Israel. So one of the questions I'm asking people is, was there anything about Hamilton, Ontario, you talked about your own personal family history, and that's kind of how that's what you identify as the roots of your Zionism. Was there anything in Hamilton, do you think, itself, in terms of the community, the Jewish community there, that you think had something special that so many people from Hamilton have made Aliyah?
In terms of the first point, there are so many communities that say exactly what you said. I come from, Flint, Michigan, and Flint has a proportionately, so it's a good story, probably not true, but it makes for a
No,
nice
but
story.
it may be relevant to smaller Jewish communities.
Right.
I think the point is a smaller Jewish community where you looked, if you really got into being Jewish, you looked beyond to the big world. And the big world from Hamilton was Toronto or Israel.
I think that growing up in a small community that made you feel, at least in my case, your minority status. You felt being a Jew, and that certainly when I have very clear memories that when I went to school, especially high school, that I felt anti-Semitism
Where?
at Weston.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. I mean, there were oftentimes would be in the schoolyard or in a classroom that someone would say, or a teacher even would say an anti-Semitic remark, and I remember them really clearly.
But there were so many Jewish kids at Westdale.
There were, but what I'm saying is that I think because the relatively small number of Jews in Hamilton, at the time 4,000 out of whatever the population was, that I think you find that people who come from small communities have a similar sort of feeling that they felt their minority status more than if they would have been raised in a large community like Toronto or New York or Chicago or Miami. So I think there's something about growing up in a small town where your Jewish identity is strongly felt. You can't escape it. You can't escape it. I think that's one thing. Second of all, that certainly in terms of community life, that I think Israel was a central part of community life. I think at the three synagogues in the city, Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, that it was a strong theme. It was an integral part of people's Jewish identity. And the third is a general Canadian comment, and that is because Canada has always its social approach has been one of not the melting pot, but rather multicultural, and the mosaic. That in Canada there was always a strong message that if you are a strong Jew, strong Italian, strong Greek, that you're a strong Canadian, and that is something that's unique to Canada, which reinforces Jewish identity, which makes it particularly easy to be a Jew in Canada. So I think for all those reasons, and even up to today, that Canada, amongst diaspora Jewish communities, has probably taken what was once the place of South Africa as the most Zionist community outside of Israel. When people talk about strong Jewish communities, strongly identified with Israel, in relative terms, strong in fundraising for Israeli institutions and that sort of thing, that Canada is far and beyond, in relative terms, any other Jewish community. And as I said, it used to be South Africa 10, 15 years ago. Now it's Canada. So I guess for all those reasons, I know it's a long answer to
It is a long answer. Let's move on. How many children do you have?
3 kids.
And they were all born in Israel?
No, the oldest was born in Canada. We moved, Shimon had been a student. He came back to get me. We worked a few years. We moved in 1983. And we had an infant who was 9 months at the time.
Well, he made Aliyah
He made Aliyah in 73. Came back when we got married in 1979. And in 83, we came on Aliyah with 1 child. 2 more kids born here. We came with a daughter, Rena, who's today 28. Our son, Noam, is the firstborn generation Israeli, who's 26, and Adina's 24.
My kids. Okay, so What's it like raising Israeli children?
It was always clear in our family and in our family narrative that we chose to be here. And I think I work in the field of Aliyah and Klitas, so
What do you
I've got to be careful. I work as the Director of Absorption Services for the Association of Americans and Canadians in Israel, AACI. So I see a lot of different ways that people approach living in Israel. And I think we, as the adults who made the choice, will always have a certain element of comparison. That we're always noticing things. I think an immigrant notices things with certain eyes and consciously or subconsciously compares. It's not the way we did it back in wherever. We didn't idealize Canada to our kids. They love their family there. We go back. We have relatives. We don't have any immediate or close family here. So we missed that, and I think we were probably, as a young couple with a baby and with healthy parents, minimized the element of raising our children far away from our own families.
What do you mean?
We didn't think about it as a obstacle, particularly as our parents aged, and with at this stage we're in these sort of classic sandwich years, but we think about it all the time. When I have a sibling in Toronto who's the one working on, dealing with care for my mom, and when my late father was ill, it's complicated to be far away. But when we made Aliyah, it wasn't an issue at all. And our kids speak English, are Israeli, and
Do you have your kids went through the army?
our kids all went through the army.
So
Tremendous pride from our point of view, because Shimon was in the army. He was in the army as an Oleh who came at an older age, so he was in the army for a short period of time. But our oldest daughter served in intelligence. Our son was in the army for 6 years as an officer, as a captain
In the tank
corps. He was in Lebanon in the war. He was in 2 wars. He was in Lebanon and in Gaza, but he considered that one not one worth worrying about. It definitely strengthened made us feel even more part of Israeli life. Our daughter was also, during the Lebanon War, in the war room of the Northern Command in her job, our younger daughter. And it's part of our life, and it's accepted as one of the prices we pay.
How does it make you feel when you look at the global media and you see how Israel has started to be portrayed over the last 10 years, I'd say, in a very negative light? Does that affect you? How does that affect you? How does it make you feel?
It affects you. It makes me feel old because of the narrative that I thought was so acceptable and so normative. To see that challenged makes me realize that while we've been living our life here, things have really been changing in the world.
Can you just say what that narrative is?
That Israel is that Israel is the brave David facing enemies and growing and building and creating against difficult odds, and it's inspiring and admirable.
And obviously,
And I still believe that.
yeah. So have you had, do you ever doubt? Do you ever doubt your purpose? Do you ever doubt when you hear what everyone is saying? Does it ever make you doubt your original vision, your original Zionism? Does it make you question anything, or are you totally solid in your belief system?
I'm solid. It doesn't. It's upsetting, but it doesn't make me say, "Oh my God, am I really an aggressive occupier?" What do you say?
No, I'm not any less Zionist today than I was the day I came here. As a matter of fact, I think Israel is in a lot better shape today than the day that I arrived. It's safer, it's stronger. The demonization of Israel is concerning, which becomes the demonization of Jews. I don't believe that everything that's said is anti-Semitic. On the other hand, there are legitimate criticisms of Israeli policies. Not everything we do is right. Not everything we do is, we're not angels either. When you deal in sovereignty, you make mistakes. And when you're a country, you make mistakes. I'm disappointed with our leadership, generally speaking, political leadership. I wish our political leadership was as good as our corporate leadership. But we face the same problem like many Western countries where the best people don't go to politics, they wouldn't go near it. And that's not different than, unfortunately, much of the Western world. But in terms of our core, that I think that yes, our cause is just. Yes, Zionism is a success. And if there's anything that actually concerns me and disturbs me, it's that it's assimilation overseas. Because part of the assimilation overseas is a distancing from Israel among some Jews. And when all is said and done, world Jewry is for us a strategic strength. And so if world Jewry doubts Israel's just cause, then it weakens the state of Israel, and it ultimately therefore weakens the Jewish people. So I am more concerned actually about the Jews than the non-Jews. I'm more concerned about that how Jews begin to believe the worst accusations of our detractors. And so that concerns me more than what different states are saying. Though again, I think some of what is said is a very legitimate criticism. I myself am no fan of this government. I didn't vote for them. I don't support them. It's not my policy. But on the other hand, much of what is said is tainted with Jew hatred, because some people still haven't got used to the idea of Jews with power.
Okay, let's. That was a great answer, but thank you both of you. Let's move on to the challenges of living in Israel and the joys of living in Israel. It's funny when I put this question to other people before you, I'd just say, tell me about the challenges, and they would end up talking about the joys. So I've learned from that. And now I'm asking, tell me on the one hand this, on the other hand this, because that's basically what happens when people start talking about this. So either one of you, and then jump in when anytime.
Well, I was, in terms of the challenges, I would say the greatest challenge is this is a very stressful country to live in. And the many people who come and don't know it well don't understand under the kind of stress Israelis live under. So first of all, you take people from 150 countries, put them into a country that's smaller than the distance between Toronto and Montreal, surrounded by Arab states, 5 wars, terrorism, reserve duty, and you have that in your life on top of life's usual stresses, family, job, whatever it may be. So what does that mean? It means that we talk loudly, we're rather obnoxious, we eat constantly, we're rude to each other, we drive poorly. This is who we are, because we're under tremendous stress. So actually, and it affects the way we think, it affects our public discourse, it affects the way we do business, it affects the way we're perceived in the world. But I would say actually when you talk about all the other challenges you know of and you read in the newspaper and so on, but in terms of everyday life, it's the level of stress that people live under because of this subliminal, subconscious concern about tomorrow. And I think actually that's one of the biggest challenges that often people don't think about when they think about Israelis, who, as far as I'm concerned, which is immodest of me to say so, I still think we're all heroes. Even, and this comes from the, as far as I'm concerned, it's from the guy at the kiosk, to the taxi driver, to the bus driver, to the professor, to the high-tech entrepreneur. As far as I'm concerned, in terms of Jewish history, we are heroes, and we are not equal partners either. For as long as we're here and going to an army and sending our children and ourselves off, we're not equal. But we're one family. But we're the neurotic part of the family. We're neurotic, we're nervous, we have a lot of anxiety. We all suffer from post-traumatic stress, and that's why we also don't sleep well. We have a large proportion of people who take, who can't get to sleep at night, and that's what we're all about. And in spite of it all, we're in pretty good shape.
Josie.
I don't have much to add to that. My sense is a lot of it has to do with how you approach things. I have seen people make Aliyah all starry-eyed and all idealism, and when they hit that first rude bank clerk, they're really broken. Because in Canada, the bank clerk is going to say thank you and have a nice day, not particularly care if you have a nice day or not. But the public discourse has a certain civility and a please and a thank you and a standing in line. So confronting a society where those aren't important values, the nitty-gritty of the exchange is more important than the niceties. And Canadians like the niceties, and they do make life very pleasant when you have to walk into the bank, the pharmacy, the licensing office, and whatever. So a lot of it is whether you're willing to accept or acknowledge that I didn't transplant myself to the same kind of society, but I know I'm here. And those little things, those things aren't the key to what makes me happy in my daily, make me feel fulfilled. Now, on a day when everyone's obnoxious and it's rude and it's loud and it's annoying and you almost get in a car accident and you're cut off and then you have a silly argument with someone, okay. But my sense is life in Canada is not as polite and friendly and sweet as it used to be either. And the rewards and the joys are way...
Let's talk about that now. Let's talk about the rewards and the joys of living here. What makes it all worthwhile?
I will give this to you in a second. My sense is partly when we have chose, and when you choose to throw in your lot with the Jewish people in your land, the sense of being part of something creative, being part of building something that some achievement is a real achievement, is the first time in 2,000 years. The whole issue of the challenges of sovereignty, which I know is a big thing for Shimon. But seeing the building, it's not neutral to me that we build a plant to purify salt water. It's not neutral to me that we, when there are Israeli accomplishments, it's part of building our people on our land. It's more exciting. It's not neutral what's happening outside the walls of my apartment. It's very, very important and real and relevant. And I think that's part of the joys. Watching our children, who are each in their own way very at peace in their identity and very articulate. You know, Israelis, we complain a lot about the education system in general, not us in particular, but it's one of the things that's part of the current protests. It needs help. But seeing, despite and because of their opportunities and their growth, the way they were raised and the way they grew up, kids who really care, who see a big picture beyond their own desire for a good career and a good job and a good salary, who are articulate, who feel connected to Israel as Israelis and to Jews everywhere. It's pretty satisfying.
No, I think the same. And the joy is to see the accomplishment. And because I've been here 40 years, that I've seen a lot in 40 years. And it's remarkable considering the obstacles in our way, which of course is war, that we've been able to accomplish what we have, and that's what it's all about for us. So as far as I'm concerned, that Israel is a tremendous success, and I am fully confident that the best years of Israel are yet to come. Fully confident, and I think that we're going generally speaking, in a good direction. Would I like to see the peace process move? Very much so. Would I like to see us come to a settlement with the Palestinians? Yes. Would I like to see our different neighbors? That's beyond my control. But over the border. But in generally speaking, in terms of the development of Israel as a democratic Western society, that I think we're going in a good direction, and I'm completely confident that the country's best days are yet ahead.
Okay, this has been an outstanding interview. We're going to wrap it up. I just want to ask you two things. What do you do for a living, and why did you change your name?
So let's start with change name. That so first of all, let's start with my last name. Last name was Albert. I'll start with the last name, Albert. So Albert was shortened from Alperovich. When my family came to Canada, like other Canadians, when they arrived in the port of Montreal, the good British customs officer said, "Welcome to Canada, that's too long a name, we're going to shorten it to Albert." So in my mind, Albert has the sound of a British, good British Protestant or Anglican name. And Stephen, I was born Shimon in Hebrew. Stephen, as far as I'm concerned, is Saint Stephen. And as a Zionist, I wanted a Hebrew name. And I also wanted that when I have children, that they have a Hebrew name and not a British Protestant name. And therefore, when we were married, we looked for a last name. And
but there was more to this.
Yes, there was more.
Before we were married, Shimon had played with names and had thought about it. This was 1979.
Right.
And I wasn't sure I wanted to take my husband's name. I was quite ambivalent about it and thought I was going to keep my own name, which also was some bastardization of an immigrant name that had been changed around, but I wasn't sure I wanted to be Mrs. Anybody. And I was living in Boston when Shimon came to get me, and go ahead and tell about the book. So we were doing research, so we agreed, and a compromise that was going to work for me was the Hebrew name that we would choose together, that Shimon would change it legally, so then right before we got married, so when we got married, I was not taking his name, we were taking our name.
So I found a book in the library which was written in 1923 by Evan Yehuda, Evan Shoshan, right? Sorry, Evan Shoshan, who was a great wrote the dictionary, first Hebrew dictionary, and the name of the book's a great name. In Hebrew, it was called "How to Change a Diaspora Name into a Homeland Name."
Shem Galuti, the Shem Moladiti.
So, what it said was the following. If your name was named after a city or a mountain or a river, for example, Krakow in Poland, your name's Krakow, we have friends who are Krakow, that you look for a city, a town, or a river in the land of Israel. So Krakow becomes, for example, Yerushalmi, and that's how they changed their names. So Albert was named after a town near Vilna in the Ukraine, and therefore we looked for something close. We took the name Arbel, which is a moshav in
Which is a
Tiberias,
place, a
which is a beautiful mountain overlooking the Sea of Galilee.
It's mentioned in the Mishnah.
And it's wherever all the birthright kids today go snapping down the side of Arbel. And so we took the name Arbel, and Shimon, I was born Shimon. So Stephen now became Shimon Arbel, and that's how I changed the name. As for what I do for a living, that for over 30 years I've been in major gift fundraising, and primarily for two places over 30 years, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Technion in Haifa. And only recently I came back to work in Jerusalem, and I had the fundraising of Hadassah Academic College, which is in downtown Jerusalem. It's a college of science and technology.